raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Raising Cain Show. Today we have the distinct honor of hosting a courageous advocate and pioneer in the realm of health and global geopolitics. Dr. Rima E. Laibow, MD, known to many as simply Dr. Rima, joins us. She's a medical director of the Natural Solutions Foundation, a trailblazer who has dedicated her career to exposing globalist agendas and preventing genocide. Dr. Rima's journey began after graduating from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and completing extensive postgraduate training in psychiatry. Rejecting conventional pharmaceuticals outside of critical care, she became renowned for her expertise in drug-free treatments like nutrition, neurofeedback, and frequencies, attracting patients from across the globe. In 2002, a revelation from a head of state about the culling of the, quote, useless eaters propelled Dr. Rima into investigating the UN's long-standing depopulation and enslavement agendas. This pivotal moment led her and her late husband, Major General Albert N. Stubblebine III, to found the Natural Solutions Foundation. I want to join me now I want to bring on Dr. Rima. Thank you for joining us. And I just wanted to, say to you that I appreciate all the things that you're doing. I have had quite an experience myself in fighting these globalists, and it's interesting because you were talking a lot about us exiting the UN, and it reminded me of something from about 20 years ago when I was working at Lockheed Martin in Manassas. There was a sign, like a big old sign that was posted out in front, and it said, get us out of, or get the U.S. out of the UN. And at the time, I think it said get the UN out of the U.S. And at the time, I was very, very kind of shocked because I thought, what do you mean get the UN out of the U.S.? Wouldn't it be get the U.S. out of the UN? But I didn't understand and realize at that time that the UN, was basically in New York City, and that it was giving this opportunity for basically all these spies in our country and, and all of this, foreign influence in our nation. But I just thought it was interesting. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion tonight. And with that, I want to go ahead and just, give you an opportunity. I shared a little bit about yourself and, in my intro, but if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and fill us in on what you're doing now and how you got into this.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for those kind words. It really is an honor to be here, Nate. I have always been a person who couldn't see something wrong that I thought was important and not try to make it better. It's just how I'm wired. And I had at the time, very painful, but looking back, I see now huge advantage of growing up in a family that was completely nuts. So I developed a very, very finely tuned bullshit meter. When something
Hmm.
was nuts or distorted or didn't make sense or, was supposed to be accepted, but in fact was nonsense, my bullshit meter goes whang right away. So
Mm.
and interestingly, when I entered medical school and I was hearing the illogic of using pharmaceuticals to poison people's enzyme systems, and if you like the effect, you call it a therapeutic benefit. If not, you call it a side effect, but basically it's the same thing. You're poisoning enzyme systems. I said I won't do that. I simply will never treat a patient uh, in a non-life or death situation with a poison. I'll use something else. And my entire medical career of 54 years of medicine and psychiatry, I have, in fact, never written a prescription for a pharmaceutical. And so my patients get well. But that's another story. Long about 2002, one of the people who had come to see me for my my medical care, was indeed a head of state. I can't tell you who it was because, reprehensible though she is, she certainly deserves the same medical anonymity as anyone else. And she clued me into the fact that it was almost time to begin the culling of the useless eaters.
Mm.
I had never at that time heard the term useless eater. So I said, "What's a useless eater?" And she said, "Not what, my dear, who?" I said, "Okay, who's a useless eater?" She said, "Those people who are consuming our non-renewable resources."
Mm.
And I said, "Did it ever occur to you that you're consuming their non-renewable resources?" And she said, "Oh, that's interesting." And then she dismissed that. And I questioned her and asked a number of probing questions, and her answers were truly horrifying. And then she left, and I thought, well, either this woman is batshit crazy, and since I was treating something physical, I wasn't paying attention to her mental state, or she's given me a great clue. And of course, the answer was both. The woman was a psychopath, raised to be a psychopath, and had turned me on to something that I needed to understand. So I did some research and I discovered that useless eater was a term of art in Germany before the Nazis were brought to prominence with the help of John D. Rockefeller Sr. and Jr. and their public relations guy, John Ivy, sorry, who was sent by John D. Rockefeller Jr. to run a little finishing school for 3 Germans before they were ready to come out, Goering, Goebbels, and Hitler, on how to take over mass awareness. And that worked very well. They were good students. So uh, I realized that the health freedom movement
Mm.
was losing every battle because we were thinking and acting tactically, not strategically. And as I'm sure you're well aware, Sun Tzu taught us 3,500 years ago that if you do not follow the principles of war, you have no chance of winning. If you do follow them, you have a chance of winning your war. And one of the things he taught us is that tactics without strategy is the surest way to defeat. So in 2004, I said to my husband, the brilliant strategic analyst,
Mm.
Major General Albert N. Stubblebine III, now murdered for the work that he and I were doing and that I'm doing now. I said, we have to close the practice, darling. And he said, why? Which pretty good question because we made our living that way. And I said, well, our side is losing every battle. We have no hope of winning because strategic minded people are not involved in derailing the globalist agenda. He said,
You
you're right.
know, there's something interesting. You made me think about. Do you remember when Trump was he was signing a bill that was going to force drug companies to lower their prices because you had
Mhm,
countries like Canada and other countries that
mhm,
were basically selling the drugs that were developed on, basically our money.
Mhm.
They were selling them for lower than what they were selling them to us, and
Right.
mainly Medicare and all Medicaid and all that. Well, I remember, Trump's, he's always, had a sense of humor and joked about a lot of things, but I never saw him ever joke about assassination and about him being, them putting, people killing him until that moment. And he said, right as he was signing it, and he goes, these are powerful people. They might just kill me for this one. And I
Mhm.
thought that was interesting because, again, it's kind of an odd thing to joke around about, but after COVID and after seeing what the drug companies were able to get away with and seeing what has happened in this country, and just, look at any news channel and look at who all the advertisers are. It's mostly drug companies. It's no surprise to me, that we are where we are, and it's no surprise to me that they've done everything they can to, to basically combat and fight against, natural alternatives to their drugs that they're peddling.
Not only that, the entire Rockefellerian takeover of society, which has been going on for 140 years, the Rockefellerian predatory philanthropy model
Mm.
of where the incredibly rich people of the world, and that Gates and Soros and Clinton are just the latest iteration of this malevolence. We're incredibly rich and we can do anything we want. Let's reshape society and make it exactly what we want because nobody else counts, nobody else has any rights, and we've got all the money in the world, and we can make any policy we want, and we can do anything we want. We are, in fact, gods, and now we know that they intend to be the new gods with biodigital convergence, as we are the new unterclass. So these people have been planning for a very, very, very long time, and as you and your audience know very well, it was John D. Rockefeller Sr., the world's first billionaire, who introduced eugenics to Germany with the
Mm.
Kaiser Wilhelm Institutes, not the Adolf Hitler Institutes. This was a long time before Adolf Hitler, with the Kaiser Wilhelm Institutes in Munich and in Berlin. And of course, we had forced eugenics in the United States with the unfit and the mentally incapable and the undesirable being involuntarily sterilized and so on. So that's
You
been
know
going
what
on for
what
about
you're
100.
Yeah, what you're talking about, so many people I've met that have never even heard about that. They have no idea about that part of American history where the government actually rounded up people that they considered undesirables and forced sterilized them. It's
That
just
was going
unbelievable.
on until the late 1970s, Nate.
Wow.
The late 1970s. So, and now if you look at the kill shots, we have forced sterilization as well.
Right.
James Thorpe, who is a pretty smart guy, estimates that with uh, the toxic loss of fertility through the kill shots and the fetuses that have been killed while their mothers were pregnant and the mothers were injected with the kill shots, that we have lost about a half a billion people. Dennis Rancourt, who's a PhD physicist in Canada, who's also a very smart guy, says, well, at a minimum, it's between 17 and 20 million people who have been exterminated, who have been genocided by the shots alone, not by the long-term
Sure. Well, I'm
effects.
sure
And
you saw the recent study that was published, that was based on I think it was a meta study of
mhm,
autopsies
yep,
and people who had died from COVID. And this was it was first put out by the Lancet, and Lancet took it down within 24 hours. And then they got it peer reviewed and got it published, and now nobody can deny it. But it was like 74% of the deaths were
mhm.
actually caused by the vaccine, not by COVID.
Well, that's what happens when you inject people with a bioweapon. It's
Yeah.
not supposed to help them. It's supposed to make them very sick or kill them. We are now in the midst, as you know, Nate, and as your audience knows, of the most successful genocide that the world has ever seen. Hitler at most killed 16 million people. And Rancourt says the minimum is 17, so we're between 17 and 20 or a half a billion, somewhere in there, and we are by no means finished. So with that genocide. Now, the pharmaceutical industry, the Rockefellerian pharmaceutical and governance takeover, most people are totally unaware, even people who are aware of the medical and public health takeover of by the Rockefellerian predatory philanthropists, have never thought about governance. How in 1992 did it come about that 174 countries, which was every country in the world at that time, signed on to Agenda 21 to destroy their countries, to depopulate their countries? How did that happen? And the answer that very few people are aware of also is at the same time that the Rockefeller money and the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation and Rockefeller University and Rockefeller this and Rockefeller that and John Jacob Astor and the Flexner Report and all that stuff was going on, at the same time that that was happening, the wife of John D. Rockefeller Sr., whose name variously is Laura Spelman or Laura Stedman, it's reported both ways, was taking over the world governance system. And schools of foreign relations were being created. There were the elite schools, there were the regular schools, there were tiers. Modern governance was being captured in the same way that modern medicine was being captured, so that by 1992, they had enough power, like the WEF says, half of all the leaders in the world are our graduates, same deal.
Right.
So they had taken over the governance mindset and practice of the entire world, and 174 countries, 100% of the countries extant, agreed to destroy their countries because that was modern good governance. Fast forward to 2015 when the Pope introduces Agenda 2030, a re-upped on steroids version of Agenda 21, and says, well, that wasn't bad enough, let's do worse. And these representatives of the countries, the delegates to the United Nations, the diplomats, the traders, all said, okay, let's do that. And they re-upped, and nobody said, wait a minute, because the governance capture is, and we can see that with Trudeau and with Biden and with most of the world leaders, and if they're not captured, they get assassinated, as per Africa, the 5 presidents who have been assassinated, boom, 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 there. So that the world's leadership, the controlled leadership, like the world's medical leadership, has been complicit, and the regulatory leadership has been complicit in the long anticipated and long planned for depopulation and enslavement agenda that we now see being rolled out, and we're on the very edge of. And I have to say, brilliantly conceived, magnificently compartmentalized and interdigitated, and created with endless arms of the octopus,
Yeah.
endless branches. And
It's interesting that you mention it like that. It's like it really is. It is like an octopus, and they do have their tentacles everywhere. And you see it in finance, in the world of finance, where you had, you got banks like Bank of America or Chase or, whoever, right, deciding that they're not going to loan money for certain things, but they'll loan money for other things that are part of that agenda. Or you see the same thing within the media, and
yes,
where they're not going to advertise with them, and they won't get paid, they won't get their money for advertising unless they meet the agenda. And so basically they're able to control everything. We've got to I got to take a break here and give a word to our sponsors, but we'll be right back to get into greater detail. I want to talk about specifically the UN's role in this. And so I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that, because I know you're well versed in that. So All right, I'll be right back.
Not believe, no detergent, no hot water, no fabric softener. Now you even threw away all the chemicals to clean your home. I don't need to buy sprays to cut through grease. I don't need to buy window cleaners. I don't need to buy carpet shampoo. I don't need to buy things to mop my floor. I don't need to buy things to take pesticide off my vegetables, fruits, and fish. Oh my gosh, where did this come from? I'll tell you where it came from. It came from hospitals. This is actually a photo of a huge commercial hospital laundry technology that cost in excess of $100,000 if you bought that whole thing, and it'll fill up your garage. That's how big it is. And what we've done with the advent of microelectronic technology, my team and I constantly use microtechnology just like your smartphone. The new EcoWasher SE is a chemical-free laundry and cleaning solution. Imagine, no more detergent, no more chemicals, saves you money, pays for itself, gives you a healthier life, and simplifies doing laundry. And now we're going to include 2 free Thunder Pure Safe Air Minis that purifies your home and sanitizes your surfaces like a thunderstorm in nature, eliminates all odors. Plus, you're receiving $100 off by using code podcast on the new EcoWasher SE. Let me remind you, 2 free Thunder Pure Safe Air Minis plus $100 off during this podcast. Podcast is your coupon code.
Military use when they need unlimited power during critical missions. Civilians like you can now get their hands on the exact same technology within 24 hours for pennies on the dollar. Folks, as a former infantry soldier, I can tell you this is the best and cheapest way to get reliable, unlimited energy. And no, I'm not talking about regular generators or the expensive solar panels. You don't have to be an electrician to do it. There's no maintenance needed. It doesn't take up a lot of space. And the best part, you won't need to rely on the power grid anymore. Click below now and hit play.
Born in the coastal plains of South Texas, Smoking Gun Coffee is founded by combat veterans that know exactly what a cup of coffee needs to taste like. Run by father and son, each coffee bean is perfected, roasted at 500 degrees, and cooled with a Gulf Coast breeze. Smoking Gun Coffee hand makes and bags each ounce of coffee for maximum customer satisfaction. With every purchase, 10% goes back to organizations that help veterans and local communities. That's Texas made, one bag at a time. To find out more, go to www.smokingguncoffee.com.
And we're back. And, thank you folks for, when you buy these products, it helps us to be able to, to continue to be on here, and it helps to fund the show. I want to remind everyone to please like and subscribe to this channel. And, we're going to continue to bring on great guests and, to help people become informed about what is going on in this country and around the world. Dr. Rima, before we went into the break, you were mentioning about, I think you were starting to get into, talking about how they've taken over, so many of these, different, industries and really the levers of power. There was somebody that in the comments, I was looking at some of the comments here, and I saw that somebody had mentioned that I'm going to put here, let's see here, let me bring this up here. I brought it up onto the screen. Dr. Laibow, your explanation of trauma-based mind control on InfoWars helped me to begin a path of healing. And, I was thinking about that, so many people really have allowed, for themselves to really become, almost brainwashed. And you see this day in and day out with the media, with things like COVID, with, and I think of trauma. I've had that. We've had some of that in our own, family with the FBI raid that was on our home after I blew the whistle. And, and it has just been a frustrating path, moving forward. Before we get into, I want to get back into talking about the UN and their role, but I just real quickly just wanted to hear from you, what is going on in the minds of America? Because it just seems like people have have lost their minds, and have lost their ability to use critical thinking and to reason. And in fact, I saw this I didn't have to know anything about science to know that the COVID shot was not a good thing. All I needed to know was that when the media, when the government, when the doctors, when everybody is lockstep together telling you, oh, you need to do this, and they're pushing propaganda nonstop on the media and, on every commercial. And then when you see that in combination with the fact that anybody that brought up anything, even questioning about it, they were immediately canceled and censored. That, to me, you don't have to know or understand anything about medicine or science to know something doesn't smell right here.
Absolutely.
But yet so many people fell victim to this. And so I'm kind of like, I'm taken aback at just the level of not just ignorance, but almost like a willful, blindness or turning of a blind eye to all of this. How does that happen?
Very, very carefully. The entire art of the psyop, the entire art of the directed awareness and the misdirected lack of awareness that people might have is something that our government and that these control uh, masters, would-be masters, have put a vast amount of expertise and money and focus on. And they have used fear, and they have used shame, and they have used a variety of other control techniques, including continual, unending trauma of one kind and another, sexual trauma, as well as the trauma of continual terror. Um, this
That
has
on
been
that note of the continual sexual trauma, do you remember the FBI vault files that got released? I think it was on the Matchstick Men or something like that, where there was a government agency basically abusing children.
oh,
And
absolutely.
they were
More
doing
than
this
one.
in order to split personalities and things like that. It was just
The
insane.
entire MK Ultra and Monarch programs were hideous experimental programs designed to learn how to control minds. And what they discovered was repeated, unending sexual trauma is the
Mhm.
most effective way to control people. The entire comprehensive sexuality education program, SOGI 123 in Canada, it has different names. This comes out of the United Nations, UNESCO, and the UN. And I'll talk about where you can see some of their foundational documents in a moment. That entire program is designed specifically to produce endlessly traumatized people whose emotional development is truncated. I am, by training, among other things, a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I understand a lot about what trauma does to psychological and emotional development. It stops it. And so the trauma that these monsters want
Mhm.
to impose on every child on the planet is to start at birth. I mean, forget about the trauma, the biological trauma of the injections in utero, but once the
Right.
child is born, every parent is being instructed now to start masturbating their children. Here's a spoiler alert.
It's just
No child
unbelievable.
on the planet needs to be taught how to masturbate. Every child on the
Right.
planet figures it out on their own. And the continual sexualization and the pedophilia from everyone in the child's environment is designed to truncate the emotional growth of the child and make the child controllable and make the child endlessly docile and compliant. This is how one of the most successful kinds of mind control in the world works. Now, if you go to, this is a really important website, preventgenocide2030.org, and you click on more, on the tab that says more, you can go to the page called The Children, and you will see there the foundational documents from the United Nations, UNESCO, and the World Health Organization, the three most egregious collaborators in this child abuse, endless pedophiliac child abuse. But that's not the worst of it. I want to offer you a challenge, Nate. This is the first time you and I have talked publicly. We've had a chance to talk privately, and I want to offer you the challenge of taking up what I am about to share with you and with your audience and making it your message. Because after this interview is over, people will say, "What was that woman's name? Where did she tell me to go?" And it's kind of gone. But you have a substantial audience with a substantial trust that you have built through your hard-earned scar tissue, so to speak. People know you and they trust you. And I'm offering you the opportunity to join me in getting the United States out of the United Nations permanently, totally. Right now, we have one opportunity, and I believe that there will not come another one, because once the Pact for the Future is adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on September 23rd, all representative democracy ends. And so, what we have now before the Congress of the United States, amazingly, and we've had bills before, usually before the House, saying we should get out of the United Nations, and they've gone nowhere, because, of course, it has to be something that both the House and the Senate pass, capable of overriding the presidential veto, which is inevitable. Right now, there are two bills which together are called the Disengaging Entirely from the United Nations Debacle Act of 2023, HR 6645 and S 3428. The Disengaging Entirely from the United Nations Debacle Act kicks every piece and part, the headquarters, the missions, the peacekeepers, quote, quote, out of the United States, and gets the United States completely separated from each and every part, including the WHO, the IMF, the Food and Agriculture Organization, every piece and part of the United States, of the United Nations. We're done. And what that means is that it will weaken the United Nations tremendously, because the driving force behind the globalist hegemony designed to absolutely destroy our lives, our rights, and
Yeah.
our genetic integrity has always been the United States. So if the United States, when the United States leaves, it will weaken the institution to the point that the globalists may allow it to simply wither and die, as the League of Nations was allowed to die when the United States
Exactly,
didn't join.
and I'm glad that you brought that up, because this is another thing that a lot of people don't know history, but the League of Nations existed and was supposed to stop us from ever getting into another world war, but it didn't.
No, it
And
wasn't.
then,
No, it was said to do
well,
that, but in
right,
fact,
that's what they claimed, yes. But in the same way, the UN was supposedly supposed to be the new better thing that was supposed to stop it, but we've had nothing but war since the UN's been in existence. And the other thing that's happened with the UN, which just drives me up a wall, is you got these they have these Committee on Human Rights or whatever, right? And it's filled
headed
with
by
like
Saudi
Iran,
Arabia.
yeah, Iran and Cuba, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, all these, these countries which have zero human rights.
The United Nations and the World Health Organization are not failing. They're doing exactly what they were designed by the
You're
Rockefellerian
right.
predatory philanthropists to do, which is take over the entire world. They were waiting until they had the science to take over our DNA. And that's what the bioweapon kill shots are designed to do, the gene therapy, which is
Yeah,
in
the
fact
mRNA. Yep,
never
it
yes,
does. It alters their DNA.
it's intended to do that, and it's intended to kill a lot of people and make
There,
them vulnerable.
there's two things I want to hit on, and it kind of goes back to something you said earlier about the depopulation program and really what their desire, their ultimate aim is. there's very, very good evidence. I mean, this is like well-known, published research, double-blind peer-reviewed studies, I should say, where they have looked at, this COVID virus, for example, and they've looked at, in particular, the spike protein. And let's, for the audience, for anybody, I'm sure most everybody that's watching the show knows probably a lot about, the vaccine and everything. But I'm going to reiterate it for anybody that doesn't understand. What the mRNA vaccines do is they edit your RNA so that it will start to create and generate spike proteins. Spike proteins are the most toxic part of the COVID virus. It is the part that does all the damage. And what they claim there, the idea behind it is that it would produce the spike proteins, which would cause antibodies to be generated and all that. But here's the problem. What they have found in very well done research, and when I say very well, look, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, but I have a very close friend of mine who is he used to be basically the head of the Navy's, public health and, what would be considered the Navy's version of the CDC. Very, very brilliant man. And I had him on a podcast on a Twitter or X Spaces. This was about a year ago. And we had a 3-hour long conversation, went into all these studies, and he went through them with me. But one of the things that was the most disconcerting about it all was that guess what organ absorbs the most spike proteins than any other organ in the human body? The female ovary. It is intentionally designed, I believe, to destroy fertility.
And is doing a very good job of it.
And that is already in conjunction to here's what what I think about when I look at something like that on a grander scale with like the UN. We know that they're using vaccines, and there's actually a video clip of Bill Gates actually saying,
yep.
And anybody can go look
it up. TED Talk.
You can look it up. There's a TED Talk where Bill Gates himself is saying that we are trying to, basically lower, the number of humans on the planet by billions, and he wants to, and he says, and we're doing a pretty good job with contraceptions and vaccines. He says, he actually says it. His quote
is that properly used, vaccines can reduce the population by 12 to 15%. But he wasn't talking about the mRNA bioweapon pseudo vaccine. Those were conventional vaccines.
Right.
God help us all.
And he was one of the biggest players in the COVID vaccines.
Still is.
With Moderna. And in fact, him and George Soros were extremely, they partnered together to buy the company that makes the COVID test. These guys they're evil bastards is what they are. And they have no intent.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say they have nothing but disdain for the human race, and they want to.
Well, it's worse than disdain. They are determined to reduce the population to less than 1/10 of its current level, and to alter the remaining human beings to be servile, subhuman, digital, converged, transhumanized slaves who cannot question, who cannot revolt, and who cannot think for themselves. This is the articulated plan. This is not what I think is going to happen. This is what they say they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And when you look at Agenda 21 and you look at Agenda 2030, I wrote a book years ago called The Truth About Agenda 21. And one of the things that I pointed out, it was very hard to get a copy of the actual Agenda 21 program, by the way. One of the things that they say is that children should not be fed enough food to allow them to come to their full genetic potential. They should be underfed, meaning their brains should be underdeveloped, because people who reach their full genetic potential with adequate nutrition consume, quote, more than their share of the world's resources. Children should not be educated to their full educational potential because people who are so educated consume, quote, more than their fair share of the world's resources. Who decides that exactly? And when you're compressed into the 10-minute city or the 5-minute city or the 15-minute city, and you can go nowhere unless you walk there, you can't get on the light rail connecting the transit communities without a permit. You are a slave inside an open air concentration camp. That's all UN stuff, and we can get out of the UN now. I figure it'll take about 10 million people picking up their Freedom Mouse. Everybody's got one. Most people don't have a wire on theirs. And when you go to preventgenocide2030.org, you can read the bill. You can then click to send an email and make a video and send a tweet and call your congressman. The whole thing will take you maybe 4 minutes, maybe 6 minutes, and then you can tell all of your circle of influence, your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues, hey, I did this. You need to do this too. But
Dr. Rima, somebody asked, Lily asked again, what was those, what were the two bills, the HR and the SB?
Yes, this is on preventgenocide2030.org. Together, they are called the Disengaging Entirely from the United Nations Debacle Act of 2023. But the individual bills are HR, and you can read them on the site, HR 6645 and S3428. It's really important, but there's another sort of yummy little bit that I'd like to share with you if I can, Nate.
Please do.
The United Nations says do this, and countries say we have to do that because we have a treaty obligation with the United Nations, and therefore we have to do what they say. For example, when Governor Abbott of Texas said, I'm going to close the Eagle Run area, Eagle Pass, sorry, and stop immigrants from coming into my state and destabilizing it, the Department of Homeland Security, you should excuse the expression, went to the Supreme Court on an emergency basis and on an emergency writ asked for the Supreme Court to stop that. And the Supreme Court said, Governor Abbott, you can't do that because the United Nations controls our migration policy. Well, how does that happen exactly? When you read the United Nations Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, what you see is it says anybody can go anywhere, and the country has to provide them with housing and clothing and education and healthcare. Even if they're citizens, don't get those rights. Doesn't matter. Nobody has a right to not be allowed to be a migrant or to claim asylum or whatever. So the Supreme Court said, our hands are tied. We're bound by the United Nations. However, if you look carefully, and the legal memo is right there, anybody can read it. If you look carefully at how we got into the United Nations, you see that we got there by fraud. It was presented by Harry Truman, who wasn't the most upstanding of guys. It was presented by Harry Truman to Senate for its advice and consent as if it were a treaty. It was presented by the president pro tem to the members of the Senate as a treaty, and it was reported in the Federal Register as a treaty that had been ratified 89 to 11, but it wasn't a treaty. The only thing he was entitled to do by congressional action was Truman was enabled to sign a charter, sign the United Nations Charter. Nowhere in the Constitution, as I've read it, does it say the president is entitled to sign a charter that brings an organization, which is a country club, a club of countries, into existence and therefore make a treaty. In fact, according to the Vienna the Vienna Conference on the Law of Treaties, the VCLT, which the United States follows, treaties only exist between sovereign states. Country A and country B sign
Right.
a treaty about trade rights or whatever, but a treaty requires both countries to bring their laws into harmony, as in your migration laws are controlled. But the United Nations is not a sovereign state.
That's right.
It's a club. And therefore, the entire treaty structure that was presented to Congress is a fraud. Any member of Congress who does not attempt to get the United States out of a fraudulent entanglement is a participant in a fraud on the Constitution and the people of the United States. And according to the legal opinions that I've gotten on this, their crimes, the members of Congress crimes, may rise to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors because of the damage to the American people and the constitutional requirement and their oath of office and so on. So we are saying to the members of Congress in this letter that I am asking 10 million people to send to their members of Congress with a couple of computer mouse clicks. Not only should we get out of the United Nations because it's not good for us to be there and enormous harm is being done and so on, but we never were actually entered into it in a proper, legal, valid way. And therefore, you have a choice. Either you get us out of the United Nations by voting for this, or you are a party to an ongoing high crimes and misdemeanors fraud, Congressman. Your ass is hanging out in the breeze. If you don't do this, we think you should do it. What do you think? So there's an extra added little oomph there to our request, which is not, oh, please, it's you are going to be in a world of hurt, Senator, if you don't do this, or Representative. And that's sort of an extra added bonus, I think.
Who are the sponsors of these bills?
Mike Lee of Utah
I like him.
sponsored the bill in the Senate, and Chip Roy of Texas sponsored the bill, and Mike Rogers of Alabama co-sponsored it in the House, and there are a few other co-sponsors. Most people like us on the Freedom Team have never heard of the bill. There are very few people who are aware of it, and it is probably the single most important bill that the government of the United States has ever had before it.
Well, I remember, just to go back to something that I wanted to bring up on, you were talking about the sexualization of children and the UN's agenda, even in that. And I want to say it was within this last year that they passed something in the UN that basically says that children, that sexual freedom is a right of every child.
Oh, it goes back before this year.
Just unbelievable.
Absolutely unbelievable.
I mean,
on March 23rd.
Yeah, a blatant design for pedophilia.
Oh, perfect. On March 23rd, the United Nations issued a judicial review to every judge, legislator, and lawyer in the world. Nobody's allowed to have their own cultural traditions for their own legal systems. And so, no, it's all got to be one, because we're going one world order here. So what it says, and I've published this document, it's available on preventgenocide2030.org. It's a very interesting document. Among the things that it says is there's that special protected class known as childhood. Forget that. Anybody at any age can consent to anything they want. As long as both sides consent, the concept of the age of consent no longer means anything. So a pedophile can say to a 2-year-old, touch me here, I'll give you a piece of candy. And the 2-year-old says, okay, and that's okay. Or a little girl who's been told that she is really a little boy and given this gender bender insanity, which is also batshit crazy, says, at the age of 6 or 11 or 14, I want my breast cut off and I want a pseudo penis made out of my clitoris. And the answer is the parents have nothing to say because the age of consent is whenever. So the special class of parent with a special responsibility to shepherd the well-being of a child, those parental rights are abolished. And I've written a white paper called The Abolition of Parental Rights. And the special protected category of child is eliminated. And as a consequence of that, children have the right to be sex workers.
Oh.
Why not? Kind of a way to earn an allowance, right?
Yeah. That's just insane.
And in
This
the
stuff
comprehensive sexuality, just one more little bit. In
Sure.
the comprehensive sexuality documents, which are also available on preventgenocide2030.org, it says, and I quote, every child has the right to sexual partners as early as possible. Among the benchmarks, by the age of 4, a child should have developed lust. Lust? Have you ever met a 4? I mean, you could have lust for ice cream. Oh, I love ice cream. That's not what they're talking about. By the age of 4, a child should have developed lust. By the age of 6, a child should be able to fill out a checklist, and the checklist is provided that says, do I want to have oral, anal, or genital sex with this person? And first, do I want to have sex with this person? And second, do I want to have oral, anal, or genital sex with this person? We're talking about a level of perversion of reality that is almost incomprehensible.
It's demonic. I'll just call it what it is. We are looking at something that I never thought possible in my lifetime. And I will just tell you folks, look, if to me, everything else that the UN is doing that's evil and corrupt, the depopulation, stuff, all of that is evil in and of itself. But this is a whole nother level when they come after your children. And that in and of itself should be every reason for us to get the hell out of the UN and get the UN out of the US.
Absolutely.
So
and
we are coming up.
We'll do that.
We're coming up on the end of the hour here. Any final last words, anything that you want folks to walk away from this, if they remember one thing from this conversation, what is it that you want them to remember? And then I always end up closing my show in prayer, and then we'll end the show. But I'll give you the last word here.
There is one issue. Everything else is secondary to it. The one issue is to literally save humanity by getting out of the United Nations. And you can do that at preventgenocide2030.org and tell your friends and neighbors. And if they don't believe you the first time, keep telling them.
Yeah. Folks, I also want to reiterate something too. You got to make sure and keep an eye on your state legislatures. You got states like California that have made it illegal for parents now to not call their children by their preferred pronouns. And they can literally take your children from you. We've got to prevent that kind of stuff. We have to fight that kind of stuff in our state Supreme Courts, and certainly we need to be speaking out and being active. We cannot sit on our butts here. We've got to do something about it. Dr. Rima, thank you so much for coming on. I definitely would like to have you on again. I think there's a lot more content that we need to cover. That's just too much to cover in 1 hour. But with that, I'm just going to go ahead and close in prayer. Heavenly Father, I just thank you, God, for people like Dr. Rima that are fighting the fight, that are doing the good work that needs to be done. Lord, I pray that you would raise up a multitude of soldiers, of patriots who will fight this evil, who will fight this demonic evil that has come into our land through the UN and through a lot of these organizations. Lord, I pray that you would open our eyes to see this evil, and I pray that you would give us the tools and the and the will, and the drive to completely put this stuff to an end. Lord, I pray that those that are responsible for it would be held accountable, that not one of them would go free without accountability. And Lord, we pray for our nation, and we pray that you would save the children, Lord, that you would save our nation, Lord, that you would save those that have become confused and lost due to brainwashing and due to all of this, transgender confusion that is being pushed around the globe, Lord, but especially here in the United States, Lord. And I pray that you would put an end to it. God, we ask for peace in our nation, Lord. We ask that you would please deliver us from this evil and help us to know how we can be a part of that in the work that you're doing, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. And with that, folks, again, I want to thank everyone for joining the show tonight. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you on Tuesday.
Raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, the time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.